Happy Monday, my sunshines. I'm going to try and read as much of this book as I can. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. I hope you got outside. I hope you went and played. I hope you didn't do any schoolwork, maybe reading. That's it. So I'm going to try and read as much as I can. Here, I only have, I think, 2 pages left of this chapter, and then I'm just going to keep reading. Toby's going to be loud, maybe. Toby, stop it. All right. But how do you stop it? You reverse the direction, said Lena. That's what Maddie told me. She said that if someone has been brave enough, the wars might not have started in the first place. But Lena, Dune slapped his hand down on the ground next to him. What does that mean? How do you do it? Lena wasn't entirely clear about this either. She took a bite out of her red fruit the doctor had handed her. It looked as hard as a polished stone, but the juice that burst into her mouth was sweet. I think it's like this, she said. She chewed and swallowed. Instead of getting back at the other side with something just as bad as they did to you, or something worse, you do something good. Or at least you keep yourself from doing something bad, she said. She took another bite of her apple. I think that's it. One bad thing after another leads to worse things. So you do a good thing that turns it around. Dune sighed. It's not very helpful, he said. How are we supposed to do something good for those people who have done so many bad things to us? Why would we even want to? Well, that's it, said Lena, wiping apple juice off of her chin. You don't want to, but you do it anyway. That's what makes it hard. Maddie said it was very hard. It's much harder to be good than bad, she said. So, what do we do then? Said Dune. His tone was bitter. Say we'll be happy to work without food. Say we'll be nice no matter what they do to us? No, said Lena. That can't be right. Or should we just go quietly out into the empty lands and not bother anyone else? No, said Lena with a sigh. That can't be it either. She stared at the water rippling by. She was thinking hard. We don't want to leave, she said. And we don't want to fight. Do you think those are the only 2 options? Well, what else could there be? If we don't fight, they'll make us leave. If we don't leave, we'll have to fight. Lena discovered a tough part in the center of the apple surrounding some brown seeds. She picked at the seeds with her fingernail. Toby, hang on. I gotta go put him in timeout for a minute. Come here. Say hi to the kids. Hi. I'm being annoying today. Okay, sorry about that. There just must be some other way, she said. What if we all just sit down in front of the hotel and refuse to move? We don't leave, but we also don't fight. They wouldn't use their weapon on us if we weren't fighting, would they? I don't know, said Dune. They honestly might. I don't think they would, said Lena. They're not bad people. They're just scared. But we couldn't sit there forever, Dune said. Sooner or later, they'd make us leave. They'd pick us up, one by one, or load us in trucks and drive us away. They would do something. Maybe they wouldn't, said Lena. Maybe we could talk and work something out. I don't think so, said Dune. Tick and his warriors would never just sit. They want a fight. Lena drew her knees up and rested her chin on them. Something good, she thought. Something good. What good act would turn this around? We could volunteer to be roamers, she said. A whole lot of us, so they wouldn't have to feed us, and we could bring things back for them. But we don't know how to be roamers, said Dune. We don't have trucks or oxen. We wouldn't know where to go. We could say that we'll do all of the worst jobs, said Lena. But that wouldn't be fair, said Dune impatiently, not liking her ideas anymore. Why should we? That's no good. He stood up, slapping the dried grass off of his pants. I think it's too late for any of that. None of this is going to work. Lena stayed where she was, still thinking. She desperately wanted to find an answer, but no answer came to her. Her spirit sank, and she suddenly felt very tired. Well then, she said, We just have to be on the lookout. Some change might turn up. We have to watch for it. I don't know what else to do." She knew how weak and silly this sounded. But to her surprise, June smiled a little. "That's like what my father told me when I was working in the pipes works. Pay attention," he said. "It was a good idea then. I suppose it still is. Anyway, I guess it's best we can do it." Lena dropped her apple core onto the ground and scuffed some dirt over it. And then they trudged back to the doctor's house. June stayed there for lunch instead of going to the Partons, and then headed back to the hotel. Lena meant to spend the rest of the day thinking as hard as she could about the choices she'd have to make tomorrow. She sat in the window seat sideways, her legs stretched out, and she tried to get her mind to produce ideas. But she kept coming up against the two walls. Fight? She didn't want to fight. Or leave, and she didn't want to leave. A slow fly buzzed against the window. Wind stirred in the grape leaves outside. "Think, Lena, think. Pay attention." And then she fell asleep. Next chapter, 26, is called The Weapon. Dun, dun, dun. Morning came and June got up. She had to be ready for anything. So he rolled up his blanket and made a pack for all his clothes, everything he had. His father had done the same thing. Downstairs in front of the hotel, the people of Ember were gathering in swarms and talking loudly and very confused. Tick roamed among them, urging courage, inspiring them to stand for their rights, telling them the time has come for a battle. His eyes flashed with a cold light. His voice rang out like a high, urgent tone of a bell. Very often the people he spoke to seemed to catch fire from his words and be filled with the burning desire to fight. Over half the people of Ember joined with Tick to be warriors. Some of them had wrenched the towel racks from their bathroom walls. Others grabbed rocks or branches to use as weapons. They started down at the road to the village, and the rest of the Emberites followed in a confused mass. June went too, the morning sun already hot, blazing down on him. Wind rifled his hair and his shirt. His mind was in turmoil, his heart thudding like a fist in his chest. Tick and his warriors carrying their towel rack, their sink pipes, their shards of glass, strode along roaring their battle cry. "We will not go! We will not go!" More and more people picked up the chant as they came into the streets of the village, and at doors and windows people appeared. Their faces, shocked faces, and people still in their nightgowns. They shouted to each other, "Look at the cave people, they're coming! They're coming into the town!" Other windows flew open and doors, and people stepped out into the streets, unsure whether to be angry or afraid. All the people of Ember had come. No one had stayed behind to wait for the trucks that would take them out into the empty lands. All of them had to know what was going to happen. They had to be there, whatever it was. They poured into the plaza and stood packed together, the warriors roaming and others nervous, some of them hiding in doorways or behind trees, afraid of what was going to happen, not sure if they wanted to be a part of it or not. Tick roared out his challenge. "People of the Sparks, we refuse to leave. We are here to make our demands. And if you will not meet them, we will fight." "We will fight," roared the warriors behind him. Others looked at each other fearfully. Will we? Will we fight? From the side of Ben Barlow appeared, running. He bounded up onto the steps of the town hall, facing the crowd, and yelled back, "What are you doing here? This is an outrage. This is unacceptable. You are leaving today, leaving here for good." "We will not go," screamed the crowd. Wilmer Mary, Ben shouted, and the other two leaders followed him up the steps. "Clear out now," they shouted, back to the hotel. "Move back, move back." They stood in front of the crowd and tried to press them backwards. But it was no use. There were simply too many Emberites. Ben darted at Tick and tried to grab him, but Tick struck him with a rod, and he lurched sideways, clutching his arm. No one had expected the Emberites had weapons. June was standing on the riverside of the plaza, slightly apart from the main crowd. He had the feeling things were right on the edge of chaos, right on the edge between between in control and being out of control. It was frightening, the yelling, the waving of weapons, the people of Ember filling the plaza, and the people of Sparks crowding around the edges, their faces full of fear and rage. Maybe, Dune thought, that the leaders would be willing to discuss our demands. Maybe we can talk, and everything will be all right. It was the only ray of hope he could see. "These are our demands," cried Tick. "Listen carefully." But Ben screamed back, "We've heard enough from you. We've finished talking to you. No more demands." When he heard that, Dune felt a jolt of fury. It lurched him into action. He sprang up onto the bench next to him and shouted at the top of his lungs at Ben. "At least listen to us," he said. That drew attention of Chugger, who was standing near him. He lurched at Dune, but Dune leapt away. He heard Ben's voice shout, "Catch the boy!" Angry faces turned towards him. Arms reached to grab him. He ducked and swerved and wove out of the way along the edge of the crowd. And as soon as he was clear, he ran as fast as he could. But he didn't go far. He had to stay close to the plaza. He had to know what was going to happen. He ran up to the river road and darted behind the town hall, where a few garbage barrels stood next to the back door. He paused for a moment. Was anyone following him? From the plaza came a roar and then a shouting voice. What was happening? Dune had to know. He pushed against the town hall's back doors. It opened easily and slipped inside. A hallway led towards the front of the building. On his right was a flight of stairs. Surely, he thought, that no one was in here. They were all outside dealing with the army of Emberites. He ran up the stairs at the top. He found himself in the tower room. It was a square room with windows on all sides, and tables stood in the middle, with straight-back chairs around it. Down below was the plaza, swarming with people. The noise was like a roar of water. Tick was at the front of the crowd. Dune could see the top of his head like a shiny black stone, and his steel rod glinting against the sun. Straight below were the steps from the town hall, the top of the heads of the three leaders. To his right, the windows were partly blocked by the branches of the great pine trees that stood next to the town hall. When he looked out the window towards the rear of the building, he saw the town hall below. This was perfect. He could see what was going to happen. He could hear, too, because the windows were open. And he realized if he stayed here, he wouldn't have to decide whether he was going to fight or not. This seemed a bit like cheating, but it was a bit of a relief, too. He thought of taking part in a bloody brawl, and that had filled him with dread. Me too. Standing in the side of the front window, Dune looked down. Right below him was Ben Barlow. Okay, I'm sorry. This is a struggle. I'm going to turn off the dishwasher, too. Give me a second. Okay. Now it feels like we're in school. Having a million interruptions. All right, let's see where we were. Standing in the side of the front window, Dune looked down. Right below him was Ben Barlow. He could see the wiry gray hair on top of his head and his hands waving furiously in the air. Mary Waters and Wilmer Dent had stepped up behind Ben. Mary tried to take him by the arm, but shook her off. He made his hand into a megaphone for his mouth, like this. "We will not be threatened," he shouted. "We are in charge of this town. It is our place. We built it. We are on our own. We own it by ourselves," he yelled so loudly that his voice rasped and cracked. "You are destroying our way of life, and you must leave." The crowd rumbled. They pressed forward. Clouds came over the sun, and a vast shadow swept across the plaza. "You may try to leave," shouted Tick, "but we are here to stay." The air seemed to quiver with rage, or was it just the wind? Everything was moving. The clouds raced overhead. The branches of the trees thrashed. The Emberites raised their moutly weapons. Up on the roof of the tower, the flag of the Sparks whipped and snapped on its poles. Dune could hear it, though he could not see it. He felt the wind whirling through his mind as well. His father's words came back to him. When the fight is over, what do we have? A place destroyed? People who hate each other? Standing above it all in the towers, he had a strange feeling of being separate, belonging neither to one side of the fight nor the other. Whose side was he on? Not Ben's, certainly. But not on Tick's either. With his warriors calling out threats, eager for a fight. That simply was not Dune. Ben held up his hand and shouted again, "We warn you, and we're ready for you." His voice was hoarse. "I'll give you one last chance. Will you leave or not?" With his head thrust forward and his hand tightened to a fist, he waited for an answer. "No!" screamed Tick. His army bellowed without him. His army bellowed it out with him. "No, never, no, never." Ben dashed to the door of the hall. Wilmer went with him, and together they darted inside. Dune froze, afraid they might climb the tower. But they came out on the steps again away, pulling a thing of black metal that ran on wheels. For a moment, the clamor of the crowd ceased as they craned their necks over each other, trying to see. Dune had a good view from where he stood, but still he had no idea what the thing was. Uh-oh, I'm nervous. I have an idea. I'm predicting it's a gun, but I hope not. He knew it must be a weapon, but it looked almost like a great black insect. It stood on black iron legs. It had a complicated black iron body, nearly as long as a trunk, studded with hooks and boxes and points. A narrow scarf of rich metal hung across it. It was ugly, Dune thought, like a skeleton of a monster. Ben turned the thing so that it pointed out over the crowd. He stood behind it, his feet planted wide apart. "This is your last chance," he shouted at the crowd. "Disperse, or take the consequences." Mary Waters dashed towards him. "Ben, no!" she cried. "We can't do this." Ben pushed away. "We agreed," he cried. "Stand back, Mary." Now the crowd in the plaza sensed danger and began to push backwards. Tick cried, "Stand your ground," and Dune saw him take a step back too. Ben squatted at the rear of the weapon. "Leave now and take your gang of hoodlums with you," he shouted, "or I fire." So that means it is a gun. Guys, no. Fire, thought Dune. What does he mean? It was clear that Tick didn't know either. "You have one weapon," he shouted, "but we have many." And he raised the rod in his hand, and behind him, his warriors did the same. Ben gave a furious shout. "Ah!" He was crouched over the weapon. Dune saw his bent back and his arms jerking at the machine. Nothing happened. His arms jerked again, harder, and at the same time Mary rushed forward. She aimed a powerful kick at the noise of the weapon, bumping it upwards, and the weapon, in a harsh machine voice, began to chatter. Uh-oh, I think we're right. It went, turning in snouts back and forth. People in the crowd began to scream. Dune couldn't see at first what the weapon was doing. What was the point of its loud, furious shuddering? The noise was simply horrible, but the weapon was staying in one place, not flying out into the crowd. Was it shooting something out of it? Yes! Across the plaza, over the head of the people, Dune saw a line of holes punch into a wall, splintering a window. But then Dune suddenly stopped its chattering. But then the weapon suddenly stopped its chattering. Dune looked down and saw Ben give a furious shake, and shake it again, pounding on its nose to aim it lower at the crowd, and yelled in panic, and scrambled backwards. And Mary shouted and tried to rush forward at Ben, but Wilmer grabbed her, and the weapon exploded again. No chattering this time, just a spurt of fire that shot from the weapon's rear end, knocking Ben flat on his back, and toppled the weapon forward so that it stood on its nose. This made the fire shoot straight upwards, a column of bright orange, scattering sparks, and reaching towards the branches of pine trees that hung over the town hall steps. Oh my gosh. I think we're right about war, you guys. Yikes. From the place in the tower, June watched, horrified. Where was his father in the frenzied crowd? Where was Lena? Below him, the pine tree was on fire. The buildings would be on fire too, in a minute, because the tree stood up against it. Smoke was already curling through the windows. He had to get out. And that was when he heard a scream, not from the plaza, but somewhere above him. A bird, an animal in the pine tree? A second later, echoing scream arose from the crowd, and June heard someone cry, "The tree! Up in the tree! Someone's up there!" June was at the door, ready to flee down the stairs, but he heard the scream again, and it sounded close. He darted back to the tower room and ran out the window that faced the tree. The lower branches of the pine tree were a mass of flames. He could hear the rush and roar of the fire racing among the dry needles. When he turned his gaze upward, he saw what the screaming was about. A boy was clinging to a branch a little higher than the tower roof, hugging the tree of the trunk. One more time. Hugging the trunk tree of the... Yikes. Hugging the trunk of the tree and screaming in terror at the fire swept upwards. Either, I'm thinking it's Kenny or Torin. What do you think? Kenny, June thought. Was it? He couldn't tell for sure, but he knew he couldn't leave him there. Maybe somehow he could get him through the window. He opened it as far as he could. It was the kind of window that swung on its hinges, and then he grabbed one of the chairs around the table. Holding it on its back, he thrust it towards the window as far as he could, holding it there. "Climb down," he shouted at the boy. "Climb down quickly." The boy saw him, and with a start, June realized who he was. It wasn't Kenny at all. It was Torin. The one who had started so much trouble, the one who had pointed a lying finger at June. For one furious second, June felt the urge to leave Torin to his fate, to get himself out of the tower as fast as he can. But he pushed that thought away quickly and shouted, "Hurry, get down here, quickly!" Torin clambered down through the branches, down towards the flames beneath him. When he was opposite the tower window, he was too far away to reach the legs of the chairs. He edged out along the branches, but it was a slender branch and bent under his weight. "Jump!" June yelled. "Jump and catch the chair legs. I'll pull you in." Torin crawled back to where the branches were sturdier. He stood up and then froze. He stood clutching the tree trunk, staring down at the flames with his mouth with a dark O. "Jump!" screamed June again. Smoke was pouring down the tower room. "Hurry, you can do it!" A gust of wind, a flame left. Now the branches just below Torin's feet were blazing, and suddenly he made up his mind. June could see the moment his decision in his face. He clamped his lips tight, fastened his gaze at the chair dangling from the window, and then he pushed himself away from the trunk with his hands and flung himself towards the tower. His hands caught the rung between the chair legs, and June's whole body was yanked forward. He almost lost his grip of the chair, but not quite. "Hang on," he yelled. With all of his strength, he hauled the chair upwards, and when Torin's hands were within reach, he grabbed one of them, then both of them, letting the chair topple back into the room. One last heave, and Torin was in the tower room, shaking violently, so hard he couldn't even stand. "Now," said June, "let's get out of here." He headed for the door. Over the sill of the window Torin had just come through, and crept a row of flames like sharp orange claws. Similes. Okay. I'm going to read one more chapter. Chapter 27, Firelight. Lena was on the side of the plaza farthest from the river when Tick called out his demands, and June yelled, "At least listen." When she heard his voice, she tried to make her own way towards him, but the crowd was so dense that she couldn't get through. Tick's warriors were everywhere. The sun flashed off of their steel rods and pipes and jagged pieces of glass. She was worming her way among the dozens of shoving and shouting people when Ben fired the weapon. She heard the sound, a chain of loud pops, and the people in front of her screamed and scrambled back. Lena ducked and put her hands over her head. She stayed that way as people pressed past her and stumbled over her. In a moment, the popping noises stopped, and there was a bang. More shouts when she dared to stand up and look. She saw that the pine tree was on fire. The flames were small, at least, creeping along the one branch. Okay, I'm going to make a second video in a little.